with two heroes of mine. Let's get going. Linnea, so you're a female athlete, NCAA Division I. What's been your experience with sports? Have you had to compete against any males? Like, tell us your story.
So the vast majority of my time in NCAA Division I athletics, I didn't. It wasn't really an issue until my senior year, which had been my fourth and last year of eligibility in the NCAA. My coaches called me over the summer of 2019 and let me know that an athlete that I had previously been seeing competing in the male category was now going to be competing in the female category against me, myself, my teammates, and every other woman athlete in the NCAA. And it was really just a discouraging moment for me to hear that someone that had been running not only 10 seconds faster than me in my event, but running a world record time for women previously as a male, now competing against us as females, was really just an interesting kind of situation, and it was really hard to, understand.
No, it's incredible. So, Rhonda, you're a state legislator in South Dakota, and you've introduced legislation on this issue. When did you first become aware of it, and why did you bring forth this legislation?
Well, I think the awareness, the first term that I served, there was a bill that was introduced that failed. But this year, when it was put out there was a bit of a pause, but then there was an excitement because this is important. We live in America, and our freedom is important, and our girls are important. I want to make sure that people know that.
No, that's exactly right. Linnea, these threats are nonstop. They've been going on for the past 10 years, and progressives have been making progress across all 50 states. What is female sports going to look like in 10 to 20 years if we don't stop these guys?
I feel as if women are going to be watching their own sports from the sidelines. We're no longer going to be wanting to compete in sports where we don't feel as if we're competing on a level playing field. The reason that I decided to speak out about something like this is because fairness in women's sports is so important to me. And if we're allowing biological males that possess physiological advantages over biological females to compete in the female category, we're no longer going to be interested in competing and being a part of sports, which is such a big part of my identity, as well as other females across the nation as well. And so if we continue to allow this to happen, things like Title IX are just going to be reversed, and women aren't going to want to be in competitive sports anymore, and it's just going to completely go against what we stand for. And so it's kind of upsetting to see.
No, it's absolutely insane. Thank you. Please give her applause. So I'm going to go back to you real quick, because I think that people take what they see on TV, sports and everything for granted, and they don't realize how much work goes into it. Can you just tell the audience, everyone that's tuning in from across the country, what's your daily training routine look like? I mean, you got to work hard, right?
Yeah, and so I had made a comment about my last season of eligibility, which would have been last year. Because of COVID, I have been able to extend my eligibility, so now I'm a fifth-year grad student using my last season in the NCAA. And so I work full-time now. And so I'm waking up at 5:45 in the morning, I'm going to practice for 2 hours, I'm then driving to work where I work all day, and then I'm doing online school because that's the world we live in right now. And I'm spending the amount of time that a typical person would at work, but I'm also doing the same thing just because I want to be as good as I can at my sport. And so to know that I'm sacrificing things that other students don't have to sacrifice, like as silly as this sounds, never had a spring break. That's a time where I'm either training or competing. I'm not going out on vacations with friends. I'm not doing any of these things because I'm sacrificing as much time as I can because I'm dedicated to being the best that I can in my sport. And so I feel as if women shouldn't have to be forced to compete against people that have a different biological advantage, like I said, because it's just going to make us not motivated and we're not going to want to stay in the sport that we love so much.
So Rhonda, you're somewhat of a champion on this issue. You've introduced legislation, you're taking on the media, you're taking on all these crazy people that are passing this legislation, and your bill in South Dakota just passed the House, 50-17. That's a huge margin, that's a big win, right guys? But At that same time, the same week that South Dakota is doing the right thing, the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. passes the Equality Act, which would destroy girls' sports by letting boys compete against them. What would you say to Nancy Pelosi and all of the Democrats who voted for the Equality Act?
You want me to be fair, right?
Please no cuss words. This is a family program.
I think that if we look at the Equality Act for what it means, it's equality. You look at women's sports and the fairness goes right across. If you're equal biologically, if you have the same level of strength, you have the same level of endurance, that's equal. Just because you might identify as something else doesn't make you equal. So we have to recognize equal for what it is, and then the Equality Act can work, but we can't make it mean something it doesn't. Right. That's what'll work for these girls.
Linnea, the thing about this issue is it's so treacherous, right? I mean, you take a step out in this arena and the media immediately tries to brand you as a bigot or a hateful person. So I spent the whole day with you today. You don't seem like a hateful person. What would you say to transgendered athletes who want to compete and want to do their sports? Do you hate transgender people? Is that why you're doing this? Or do you just want to, tell the audience?
Just kind of piggybacking off of what Rhonda said is that there's no part of me that doesn't want to be inclusive. Obviously, I'm looking for proposed solutions that would create inclusion for everybody, but not at the exclusion of biological women. We can't just have... we use this trigger word as inclusion, but people don't realize that by being inclusive in that sense, it is exclusionary to people like myself. And so we don't want men's and co-ed sports, we want men's and women's sports, and that's why there is separation of sex within sports as well. And so I think that gender identity doesn't erase physiological advantages, and that's just something we have to remember.
All right, Rhonda. So at American Principles Project, we're polling nonstop. We're a political organization. So we found that this issue of not letting boys compete in girls' sports is like an 80-20 issue for the good guys. Right now, there are 24 states that have introduced this legislation similar to yours that would save women's sports. Why isn't it 50? What's holding these other legislators up? Why aren't more states introducing this legislation to protect our daughters' opportunities?
I guess I'd like to say that it takes wisdom, it takes courage, and it takes an exercise of common sense. And the fact that there are 24 states that are doing it, let's let that be encouraging. Let's let a momentum build up. In our house, it was 74% of our people looked at it from a common sense perspective. And if people will just do that and recognize that there are differences, that's what's going to carry it, and that's what's going to protect these girls. And just as Linnea said, it is not exclusive. It is inclusive for everybody if we just let things go back to how they were and the way Title IX was set up, that there are differences. Let's recognize the differences and treat equality, apples to apples. That's what we're trying to do.
That's right. What would you say to a legislator or a politician who's on the fence and hasn't really been speaking out about this? What would be your advice to them?
Well, they could talk to their families. If you talk to fathers, mothers, grandparents, they want their girls to be able to compete. It's a dream, to be able to challenge yourself to your personal best. And no one will be able to do that if you're not competing equally. So if they would talk to the people in their districts, in their states, they're going to find out that this does matter. It's a very silent majority. And then also, if you don't have any grandparents or kids, take a look at it for yourself. The research will hold it. It'll prove it.
Yeah, I think that's right. So we're almost done here, and I just want to say, if there's anyone out there in the CPAC audience that wants to get engaged in this fight, they want to protect their daughter's sports, text America to 313131. We'll get you signed up, engaged, we'll get you involved in your state legislatures. We got to get this across the finish line, and we got to get it done. Thank you. All right, Linnea, closing thoughts. What do you want to tell the audience?
Just that you need to listen to people like myself that do have stories, because as you've said before, that when you come out and speak about things like this, people just all of a sudden come up with all of these different negative titles as to why I'm talking about it. But what I experienced is what I experienced, and you can't devalue my story. And I just want to be able to be an advocate for other girls that are, like you said, being the silent majority, because we're afraid to speak out about it because of the negative repercussions we may have. But there are a lot of people, based on your poll and just based off conversations that I've had, people are on our side. And it's all about being inclusive, but like I said, making sure that women aren't being discounted either.
That's right. Rhonda?
I think there's an underlying message in all of this. Sports is important because sports builds confidence, sports builds self-discipline, perseverance. People that are involved in sports go on to succeed in a lot of other ways. It's important to see that. But the underlying message here to me is that if we allow males to compete in girls' sports, we're telling those females that they aren't important. And what is that going to do to our future? Women have risen to our governor is a woman. She's a fantastic governor. And we have other women, we have women
Yes.
congressmen. And they have done those things, and largely in part because of sports, because what it did for them. So if we take that away from them, we're telling them that it's not important anymore, and it takes hope away. On the flip side of that, if you have males who are competing against females, and they're winning because they have a physical advantage, we're telling them that it's okay to be superior and almost to bully. And I don't think that's the message we want to send to any child in this country.
Well, Linnea,